Welcome to Band Talk with Charlie Mangini and friends. The only podcast where it's okay to talk in band. On this podcast, you will be able to hear conversations with some of the greatest names in wind band conducting, composing, and arranging. We'll also visit with great college, high school, middle school, and elementary band directors to get their thoughts on various aspects of being a band director. We'll have regular check-ins with instrument specialists, music dealers, and instrument repair professionals. And if that's not enough, we'll even have regular conversations with Dr. Tim, who will help keep us motivated. That's Band Talk with Charlie Mangini and friends. And now, here's Charlie.
Welcome to Band Talk with Charlie Mangini and friends, and this is our 11th podcast, and today we have another great set of conversations for you. Before we get to those conversations, let me share these thoughts. I'm continually reminded how unsettled things are in the world, and especially in the world of education. This week, the California State University system announced that classes for the fall will be online. Other states are trying to create a hybrid system of delivering instruction, while others are working to bring back things as close to normal as possible with face-to-face instruction. With that, the thing you have to remember is that everything is in a state of flux. Things are going to change. Decisions will change. Plans will change. Situations will change. With the state of the economy, schools are finding themselves with budget shortfalls. And with budget shortfalls come cuts to budgets, programs, and staffing. Now, I don't mean to be giving a doom and gloom scenario here, but what I am trying to say is that it is more important for you, more important than ever, for you to keep the lines of communication open. Though you are most likely working from home, this is not a time to isolate yourself professionally. You have to be proactive. As you will hear later in the podcast, the key word is communication. You simply have to communicate. If you have not had a conversation with your administrator or your colleagues, do it now. Write yourself a set of talking points to help guide your conversation. Then get on the phone and speak to them. Emails don't do the job because emails don't contain music. The tone of your voice, the emphasis of your speech, that's the music that really carries the message. Our voices are so much more powerful than a page of empty words. Next, start to develop a set of action plans for yourself. These are not going to be set in stone, but do give it some serious thought. Know that with change comes opportunity. Remember, organisms that adapt survive. Don't be a dinosaur. Don't be unwilling to change. Ken Blanchard wrote a book many years ago titled Playing the Great Game of Golf, Making Every Minute Count. And in this book, he provides 7 reactions that people have when they need to make a change. Here are 3 that I feel really apply in our situation. First, when change happens, we often feel awkward, ill at ease, and self-conscious. Second, people tend to focus on what they have to give up, not on what they might gain when change happens. And third, we feel alone, even if others are going through similar changes. Well, know that you are not alone. And if you start to circle the wagons and communicate with your colleagues, parents, students, and administrators, if you will engage your professional networks, your music dealers, resources within the profession, retired teachers, college faculty, business leaders who too are going through these times, you'll find that you have the knowledge, strength, and resources to get through this successfully. I know you can do it, but you have to start now. On today's podcast, we'll begin with a great visit with Gary Hill, Director of Bands Emeritus at Arizona State University. Gary is one of the finest conducting teachers and pedagogues I have ever met. His work in helping directors transform their ideas into physical movement is fantastic. After Gary, we'll visit with Dr. Cory from the University of Houston. Cory will talk about how the need to create a place for his student teachers to have those important conversations that take place outside the classroom led him to create his website, virtualmusicconferences.org, a place where you can go to find out about virtual music conferences available to you. And finally, we'll have a check-in with Dr. Tim. Tim and I talk about the fact that the need for music advocacy has never been greater, and we offer some ideas for you to consider to implement into your program. That's Band Talk. We'll be right back.
Band Talk with Charlie Mangini and Friends is made possible through the support of Hal Leonard, Eastman Musical Instruments, and Vandercook College of Music.
Our next guest on Band Talk with Charlie Mangini and Friends holds a very special place in my heart and in my life. He was a guy that said, "Come on, I'll help you. I'll show you the ropes," and did me very, very well when I was working on my doctorate degree at the University of Missouri, Kansas City. And his name is Gary Hill. Gary, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Charlie. It's a pleasure to be here.
Well, it's my honor. It's just great to see you again and great to have you with us. You know, Gary, I remember you were at East Texas State University and you had come to UMKC, although I had not learned about it yet. And I got a call from our mutual friend, Bob Buckner, who was doing a marching band camp at Commerce. And he said, "Hey, Charlie, you know, Bob Buckner here." He said, "Man," he says, "you know this new guy at UMKC?" And I said, "No." He said, "Oh, man," he said, "you better get to know him." He said, "He's the real deal." And that was, you know, and he went on and on and on, talked about you. So I reached out to you, and we were going to the East Kansas Band Directors meeting, if you remember that. And
I do.
told you to go along. And we met alongside of I-70. And you were parked there, and I was parked there, and we went up to the next exit. You jumped in the car, and we went to Lawrence, Kansas, and the rest is history.
You know, you have an amazing memory. I had forgotten that detail until you just said it, and now it's as clear as day.
Changed my life, I'll tell you. That the call from Bob Buckner and the pickup alongside the interstate. So there you go.
There we go.
So Gary, if I remember correctly, you were in Jim Griffith's band in Plymouth, Michigan, and then went to the University of Michigan to begin your college career. Is that right?
That is correct.
And so what do you remember about your early years at Michigan?
Oh, my goodness. Well, first and foremost, as a 17-year-old freshman, having the opportunity to play in Dr. Ravelli's last band and go on a tour of Europe with him and so many astonishing musicians certainly put a mark on me that has lasted with me the rest of my life. I remember the amazing teachers there. The faculty was phenomenal, as they still are. Elizabeth Green as a conducting teacher and violin teacher, all of the faculty members who taught wind pedagogy classes, every one of them fantastic. And then, of course, I also remember putting myself through school, working terribly hard and practicing my tail off.
Yeah. So when you graduated from Michigan, what was your first job after that?
I was very, very fortunate to be hired by the West Bloomfield Public Schools, right outside of Detroit. And there I taught high school, all of the classes that one normally teaches as a high school band director, jazz band, concert groups, marching band, and so on. And then I also taught beginners at an elementary school. Wow. Following that, I was lucky enough to get a job at Traverse City and did similar things and also taught some junior high there as well.
Yeah, and I was talking to Bob Reynolds earlier today, and he attested that you did a fantastic job at Traverse City. He couldn't say enough nice things about you, so you're going to have to send Bob a check for that.
Thank you. That's very kind.
So, Gary, what do you remember from your time as a high school band director?
Wow. Well, first and foremost, Charlie, I was fortunate to work with fantastic students, both at West Bloomfield and Traverse City. And in retrospect, I realize how incredibly patient those students were with me because, like every beginning teacher, I had a lot to learn. They were wonderful teachers of mine. I remember also realizing very early on how little I knew compared to what I thought I did about everything, especially instrumental pedagogy. And so dug in and studied as hard as I could, asked a lot of questions, invited all kinds of people to do clinics on every instrument, and grew as rapidly as time would allow me to grow.
So how did that experience as a high school band director make you a more effective college and university teacher?
Oh, without question, the pedagogical knowledge I gained helped me at the university level because even though students in universities are studying with their own private teachers, one still has to teach in ensembles first, but also one has to be savvy enough to know uh, what the students are doing well and to be able to resonate with them in that way. So I think the depth of pedagogy coming in was important. Organizational skills that one learns to survive as a high school band director were critical, and certainly just understanding from high school students the standard progression of operant behavior, if you will. And that is that for every antecedent, there will be a behavior, and then from that, a consequence. And learning that cycle early on and remembering it is helpful.
Yeah. So when I met you, you already had quite a reputation for being an incredible conductor and a conducting teacher, and I can attest to that. I mean, during my time when I was working on my doctorate, I was constantly amazed, and I learned so much. So when did that interest in conducting and developing your skill really begin to manifest for you?
Well, Charlie, first, thanks for the kind words. Um, they began to manifest before I even had a clue about what I was going to do for a living. After my freshman year, at the University of Michigan, prior to having conducting classes or anything, both the junior high and high school faculty at my hometown in Plymouth, Michigan, invited me back to work with bands during the last month of school, since the university was all done. Those opportunities and receiving feedback from practicing teachers, even before I had conducting class, launched me down the road uh, that ended up being my career. uh, that next year, of course, I started conducting classes with Elizabeth Green, and those were phenomenal. But I have to tell you that ending up as a band director was purely an accident, and I was determined that I was going to be a performer, and I wanted to be a performer, regardless of the fact that I was a music education major, which also, by the way, was an accident. And I can tell you that story if you'd like. But uh, I really had planned on being a performer and told Elizabeth Green and others that, and then had the opportunity to start working at West Bloomfield High School sheerly because somebody had to take a maternity leave. And I tell you, by Christmas break, I never looked back. Fell totally in love with the whole idea. Later, as I was working as a high school band director and doing my graduate work, I had the chance to work with Bob Reynolds and then Fred Fennell, and both of those people were tremendous influences on me.
So as a conductor, before I start thinking about what I should look like on the podium and what the music needs to look like, what do I need to do?
Well, first of all, in this day and age, every one of us has the opportunity to listen to the piece that we're about to prepare. And I'm one of those people who believes in listening to as many versions of it as possible. If you're premiering a piece or doing a brand new piece, at least listen to the MIDI version. Get some sense of it. Then do your homework. Find out about the composer. If it's a living composer, that's easy. If the composer's no longer living, do your research. Find out everything you can about the context of the music you're about to learn. Then I begin singing. I begin singing all the parts. I use the composer's marked tempos, assuming they are there. And I try to sing faithfully the correct articulations, the correct dynamics, the correct intervals. I check myself. And after a very long process of doing that, I listen to the piece again and see how well I've done with my learning of what's there. Only then do I begin to sing and move together and figure out what it's going to take to express the way I feel about the music and what I've learned about the music as a conductor.
So your concept of making the transfer from musical intention to conducting gesture comes after you really have a good feel of this is what the piece is about.
It does, and that continues to evolve as I sing and I move, and then I start planning rehearsals. As I plan rehearsals and think about what the musicians may struggle with and anticipate those things, I change my conducting. And after each rehearsal, I adapt my conducting to what I think they need. They may need me to be a little more pragmatic here, or perhaps they need a little more inspiration here. And that process continues all the way until the concert and really honestly past the performance, because I take each performance and then spin backwards and figure out what did I do in rehearsals, that may not have been as effective, and how did it result in the performance being not as effective in these particular places. And then what could I do differently in my preparation next time to improve that process? So it's a continuous cycle for me.
I remember you telling us that the approach, and I hope I got this right. You said when the music has high energy from the podium, we almost need to have lower energy. And when the music has lower energy, we need to almost have more energy from the podium. Can you explain on that a little bit?
I can. Yeah, there are a couple of things related to that idea. First is a teaching concept. When students are struggling, I don't believe that's the time for us to be super hyper. We need to be relaxed and slow down the whole speed of everything and let them process. But the other related concept there, what you're referring to, I think, is when the texture is really busy and complicated, the last thing that musicians need from us is to see something busy and complicated. And yet, when the music is slower, I think they want more information from us about how we feel about the music. So I think those two things together are probably what you're referring to.
Yeah. I remember you always talking about gestural vocabulary, and that conductors have a gestural vocabulary. So, how does a person increase their gestural vocabulary?
Well, first, we do what all good composers do: we borrow and steal. And I believe in I believe in stealing from the best, and so I love watching great conductors of every genre and looking at their movements and trying to figure out why they're doing that at that particular time. And if I think it might be something that I can use, I'm happy to borrow it and try it out. The other thing though is to expand a vocabulary that's really authentic for ourselves. I think we only need to take 2 or 3 works per year if we're a school band director or orchestra conductor, whatnot, and look at the specific DNA of each work. Because in that specific DNA, we are going to find things that are different from any other work we've ever done. And from that, create for ourselves a gesture we think is appropriate to that musical moment. Try it out, see if it works in rehearsals. If it does, there we've added one more word, so to speak, to our vocabulary. And if we do that over time, think about that, adding 3 to 5 of those per year over 10 years, you've got 50 new ways of expressing something. And then you can begin to vary those very subtly uh, with different pieces of music. So I think it's a longitudinal process for sure, but it's also an intentional one. One has to go after the specifics.
So as I hear you, and I hear in between of what you're saying, are you saying that conductors should really practice their conducting without an ensemble in front of them?
I certainly believe in that very strongly. In fact, I feel hypocritical if I have not practiced and I stand in front of an ensemble of people and tell them to practice their parts, because there is no way that I can be what I need to be for them without that. No, I may be a lot more awkward than a lot of people, and perhaps that's my problem. But I also know that as I've gotten older, I found I have to practice more to be as effective as I want to be.
Mhm. So, what advice would you give a middle school or high school band director that really wants to improve their conducting?
First and foremost, not just practice, but deliberate practice. Practice your weaknesses, especially with respect to your fundamentals. For example, the single most powerful thing we have to do is give preparatory beats, not just at the beginning of the piece, but also as each event occurs or each entrance occurs. We should be very specific and exact with our preparatory beat, in my opinion. That takes a lot of practice. And just like professional musicians, whether it's a Joe Alessi or a Yo-Yo Ma or anybody practice their fundamentals every single day, we must also practice ours to stay sharp. Beyond that, rigorous score preparation and really regular self-assessment are the things that I think help all of us to grow and are mandatory for each of us.
Yeah, I had a conversation with Joe Alessi recently, and he talked about how he got better as a trombone player was that he recorded every time he played and then he listened to it and he analyzed it. And he said, that's what made me a better trombone player. I'm sure the same thing is true for us as conductors to videotape ourselves and be honest with what we see.
I would completely concur with that.
Yeah. So if you were going to give a conductor a checklist of things that they need to be sure they do or avoid when they stand on the podium. And of course, you could go on for hours about this, but give me your top three, five, seven, whatever it is, things that you would make sure that you want them to do or avoid.
Yes, you're right. I could go on for hours, but I won't. First and foremost, the most important thing is to connect. So, assuming you know your score, really know it, risk making mistakes by not looking at the score and look at the musicians in front of you, no matter whether they're sixth graders or professionals. Connect first and foremost. Then make sure you engage everybody in all kinds of different ways. I leave the podium a lot with younger students, walk around. Um, I want to see what they do without me moving. I want to listen to what they're actually doing. So, in other words, employ a lot of different teaching modes if you're teaching younger students. And I think also, Charlie, something very important for me is to use the power of not yet. In other words, I think it's imperative that we reward the results of effort, but not the effort without results. And I think this is confusing to people because of our long history at this point, decades long history with the sort of uh, everyone gets a trophy movement, for lack of a better word.
Mhm.
Students know when you're being honest and when you're being dishonest. And this has nothing to do with being mean or personally demeaning or anything like that. It simply is use the power of not yet to be honest. Say to somebody, we aren't there yet, but I appreciate what you've done. Let's keep working down this path. I know we're going to get there. That's different than saying, that's really good now, because the student knows it's not really good. So why be dishonest? So reward the results of the effort, not the effort without results.
Mhm.
The last thing I'll say is I think all of us should record our rehearsals or videotape them and strive to be at least 80% co-verbal or nonverbal. That's hard for every one of us because we love to talk, and certainly teaching involves some talking, as does any other endeavor. But if we can get to a point where we're pretty much 80% on the music, um, that I think is a wonderful goal.
So, Gary, when you're not occupied with conducting or music, how you spend your time?
Wow. Well, of course, any of us with families try to spend quality time with pursuits as a family. But I also read a great deal, Charlie, and I love to train my dog. I have fallen in love with uh, the sport of agility, dog agility, and I love dog training.
Wow. Are there any transfers that you can make between training a dog and conducting a band?
Believe it or not, there are incredible transfers.
Oh, come
So,
on.
no, first and foremost, training in continuous growth of foundational skills with a dog is something, again, that every good professional musician does. No professional musician stops working on their fundamentals because they've made it, right? In
Right.
fact, if anything, they might intensify their work. I've discovered that world-class dog people do exactly the same thing. Despite how good a dog gets, they keep training the foundation and fundamentals just like we do as musicians. As a handler running an agility course, you wouldn't believe how similar that is to conducting a group. It's uncanny. The difference is a dog never forgives your mistakes. In other words, the dog doesn't know you made a mistake. They just simply do what you tell them to do. So if you turn the wrong way, move your hands the wrong way, they're off course. And of course, whose fault is that? It's yours. So our musicians are very, very forgiving in that sense. But honestly, the cycle of engagement or looking for commitment, cueing the next event, and making sure you stay connected is exactly what we do as conductors. It's uncanny what the comparison is.
Wow. So I understand that you're launching a new in-depth online course study for directors, and really dig into conducting and helping people with their conducting. Can you explain the concept and what your plans are?
Absolutely, and thank you for asking about that. I had planned to launch this fall a 6-month virtual symposium. The reasons for that are these. I've done a lot of conducting symposia and workshops in my life, and one of the comments that is consistently made is, "Man, I wish I could do this with my own group," or "I wish I could do this for a longer period of time than 2 or 3 days or a week." So I've been thinking about this for a long time. Doing something over a 6-month period where people get a chance to really work at their conducting, try it out with their ensembles, get feedback from me as they try things out, and gradually grow. Well, obviously, when this crisis hit that we're currently in, it seemed to me that there might be a lot of teachers out there who would like to take the opportunity to grow now. Well, they have even more time to devote to their own personal growth. So I decided to push the launch of this forward. And indeed, we're starting registration tomorrow and starting the course next week, and it'll run through October. I'll be giving the teachers and all the registrants weekly challenges, and those will encompass score preparation, the art and craft of conducting, and rehearsal methods. I will be giving monthly webinars with myself and guests that are devoted to professional growth and sort of wide open questions and answers. And I'll be reviewing people's video excerpts from the past and answering and responding to all questions pretty much 24/7 as I can. So I think, uh, I hope at least that this will be of value to some members of the profession. And I look forward very much to refining my own online teaching skills because I think this is a direction that all of us are going to end up going eventually.
So do you have a website for this, Gary?
There is not a website. However, there is a Facebook page called The Complete Conductor, which is the name of the symposium. And if anyone would like more information, they can simply ask to join The Complete Conductor or send me a message via Facebook, and I will respond appropriately and let them know how to get more information.
Yeah, because there's a good chance your class is going to be already started before we air this conversation that we have. So hopefully people will still have interest, and once October comes, I hope you're going to offer it again. Correct?
That is my plan, Charlie, and certainly I will hold registration open for several weeks, so there will be no problem allowing people to certainly register, especially at the auditor level for a long time.
That's great. Gary, I so appreciate you spending some time and sharing your thoughts, man. It's just always invigorating to have the chance to chat with you and to see you and to be with you. And I hope that we get through this coronavirus soon and I get a chance to thank you in person.
Well, thank you, Charlie. I feel the same way about you. It's been a real privilege to connect with you. It's always rewarding to speak with you, and I thank you for having me as a guest.
Thank you. Give our best to Lisa, and Wanda joins me in sending her best.
Thank you, Charlie.
Talking with Gary Hill brings back so many great memories. I'm sure you picked up from our conversation that Gary is a brilliant thinker. He is so articulate, and his conducting, much like his speech, is free from interference. I loved the power of the not yet. What a simple but great tool to add to your toolbox right now. And then the need to really take our conducting seriously, practicing, studying, and ways for us to increase our gestural vocabulary. Just priceless information. I recently spoke with Gary about the Complete Conductor Online Symposium, and he mentioned that he is still accepting people who would like to get in and audit the class. Now, this is a fantastic way for you to experience and learn from one of the best. If you have a question about this, please contact Gary at thecompleteconductor@gmail.com. That's thecompleteconductor@gmail.com. Knowing Gary, he'll get right back with you and help you get on your way to becoming a better conductor. Next, we'll visit with Dr. Cory Meals from the University of Houston, who will tell us a little bit about his virtualmusicconference.org website resource and share some ideas on where band is today and where he thinks it might be heading.
Vandercook College Music is proud to support Band Talk with Charlie Mangini and friends. Vandercook is the only college in the nation solely devoted to the practical education of the school music teacher. If you have a student who wants to teach music, or if you or someone you know is looking for a great, practical Master of Music education program, then look no further than Vandercook College of Music in Chicago, Illinois. Vandercook also has the largest array of on-campus and online classes in their Mecca continuing education program. To learn more about Vandercook, visit vandercook.edu.
So joining us on Band Talk with Charlie Mangini and friends is a dear friend, a kid that I've known quite a while, a long time, from Pennsylvania. Somehow he ended up in Houston. Cory Meals, Dr. Cory Meals, welcome to the program.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having me.
So, Cory, it's been a couple of years since I've had the chance to see you and sit down and chat with you. So catch me up on what you've been doing.
So I've been doing a lot of things. Probably just kind of a potted history a little bit. Like I taught in Texas for 8 years. I was very fortunate to get a job in Dallas-Fort Worth right out of Vandercook and had a great time teaching there. And then down here in Houston, decided to get my master's at University of Houston in wind conducting with David Bertman and Eddie Green and all the people that are kind of orbit around the constellation of U of H. And then from there went and got my doctorate at the University of Washington with Steve Morrison and Tim Salzman and Brad McDavid. From there, got a job in Northwest Georgia, just outside of Atlanta at Kennesaw State. And about 3 years ago, ended up back here at Houston, at University of Houston on the music education faculty. So a little bit of a slingshot around the country for us.
So you studied with Eddie Green, and then you studied with Tim Salzman. That's kind of polar opposites, isn't it?
In some ways, yes, but surprisingly, in other ways, not. They both have obviously a strong passion for music education in ensembles. And the way they go about creating those experiences has more similarity than I thought it would. But at the same time, there are notable differences. And I think that's what gives it its flavor that we appreciate, is that news of difference between the two is kind of the things we appreciate about each of the teachers and the personalities they bring, but also the experiences we have as students.
Yeah, and that adds much more to your toolbox too. So
Totally.
Increases your scope of thinking and the number of ways you can approach things. So I think that's awesome. So what's your role at the University of Houston now?
So I am an assistant professor of music education. So I teach teachers basically, and really just kind of help mold our undergraduates and help make our program stronger, as well as working with our graduate students. And occasionally I'll moonlight and go over and get to work with the bands, which is always fun.
So in a recent email that we traded, I learned that you've hosting a website, or actually an activity or a resource called the virtualmusicconference.com. So would you tell us what that is and how you got the idea for it?
Yeah. So I was approached kind of right after things started shutting down in Texas by a local band director, Joni Vertel Perez, up at the Woodlands High School. And she had a concern for her student teacher, who's one of our students, but also student teachers broadly, missing out on kind of the conversations that you have in the director's office where you're talking about, well, what do I do when I go interview? What are good questions to ask and things like that. And so she wanted to provide a forum for that. And so we started hosting these Zoom calls with 30 to 40 kids talking about those things, like what is it to be on the job search and what is it like to be an assistant director, because that's commonly the job they would get here in Texas. And from there, I started noticing that students were kind of bailing out about halfway through the call because there were other things going on online. So it was very much like a conference where you would just kind of have the same session, have two sessions at the same time, and jump over to the other one. And so I thought to myself, like, where are they getting this information? And I started coming across more and more and discovered there's really no central repository for it. And so it's turned into this kind of ad hoc organic conference that we're hosting online. And there's no central program book. So that's what virtualmusicconferences.org is set up to be, is a, for lack of a better term, a conference program for a conference that's ever evolving and organically changing over time.
It's a great resource. I've looked at it and gone through all your links, and there's a lot of stuff out there that I was completely unaware was happening. So thank you for providing that service. That's terrific.
Oh, totally. Yeah. I mean, and the intent is that it's going to add to itself as it continues on. So if anybody has things that they want on there or things that they think are really cool, just send them my way and I'll get them posted as soon as possible.
So with virtual music education, uh, is this just a stopgap in the way we're learning, or the way that learning has to take place now, or are we really seeing the birth of a whole new world in terms of education?
That's like that's the question of the moment, isn't it? And it's really interesting to think about from a intellectual standpoint, and from a practical standpoint. I think the answer is yes and no to all of those things. There's an author, William Gibson. He's actually the guy that came up with the phrase cyberspace, but he talks about this idea that the future is already here. It's just not evenly distributed. And I think what we're seeing is that we've had to kind of all glom onto these platforms like Zoom and Google Meet and whatever version Skype that we want to use. And we're seeing where those things work really well because we have no other alternative right now. But we're also seeing where they fall short. So I think it's a stopgap in the short term, but long term, I think we're going to see more interaction like this over these online platforms, but it won't replace the things we know this doesn't serve. This can't replace ensembles. This can't replace in person instruction, but it can augment it. It can serve as a really good way for us to interact with people who we can't get on campus or we can't sit down next to, but we can still have a meaningful conversation with them. So I think it's pointing towards a future that's more integrated with technology, but not totally subsumed and only through technology that we're learning.
So, what's the future of band as you remember it?
I mean, I think it's going to look a lot like what we've always done, but I think this sort of thing provides an interesting avenue for us to add more experiences to our students. I do think short term, we're going to put to test everyone's comment that is kind of really commonly said of, chamber music is the thing that really helps us grow as musicians, because we might not have the opportunity to have groups bigger than 8 or 10 just because of CDC rules in the fall if we're back to in-person instruction. So we may kind of get to put that to the test and see what kind of growth we see in our students from a musical perspective. In terms of the way technology is interacting with what we do in the band space, I see a lot more what we would call Skype rehearsals or Skype rehearsals, where you kind of have a composer or a conductor, or somebody come in and give you feedback from a virtual standpoint. And I think one of the cool things about that is the range of people you have access to. We all think of music as this very hierarchical setting, but what this is showing is that, I could reach out to anyone or you could reach out to anyone and stand a good chance of getting their attention because we all have time now. But also, it shows that we can get people in to talk to our students who we might otherwise think were inaccessible.
When I was teaching at Vandercook and I was doing graduate classes and we'd be doing things that dealt with repertoire, I always encouraged the students to go and call the composer. And they would always be hesitant. Oh, the composer wouldn't want to talk with me. And I said, well, when you talk to the composer, they're really talking about their favorite subject. I mean, they're talking about them and their music. And they've always been accessible. But I think through technology now, not only are they accessible to the teachers, but we're making them accessible to the students and they're making themselves accessible to the students. And I think that's just fantastic.
Oh yeah, I completely agree, and that's a really good way to kind of paint that because it democratizes that access to the composer. And I mean, my wife, she has a business where she represents composers, not as an agent, but as a business person. She kind of does a lot of the back end work for them. And they all love these sorts of interactions with students. They get a lot out of it. And it's such an important thing that I think we undervalue as teachers in terms of the way our students interact with the works, to actually see the person who wrote the notes that the students are playing is immeasurably beneficial to them.
You mentioned you taught high school band for 8 years in Texas, and then you ended up at the University of Houston, and you're back there teaching. And we all know in Texas, band is it's another world. I mean, it's more than just a class. In many areas, it's a sport. So, what's going to happen to band programs if there's no football in the fall?
That again, that's another hot question right now that I think I think they'll be okay. I think they'll survive. I think there's enough community support for what they do and the value they bring to students, both musically and just personally, developmentally, that they will weather this storm. I think they're going to look different. I think that might end up being, from a silver lining perspective, a better thing because it's going to force us, as this entire pandemic has, to reevaluate what's important to us. And the one thing I'm noticing is band directors online are, they're doing assignments. They're having their students do projects through the Acapella app or through smart music or things like that. But the biggest thing that all of them are reporting is that they miss their students miss each other, and that community, that bond that we all share, and this is universal, it's not just in Texas, is the most important aspect of what they do. And I think recognizing that is really important, especially in a state like Texas where we are very competitive and we, like you said, it is a whole different world down here. And sometimes we lose sight of that connection being the vital piece. And so I think that is going to help strengthen our programs down here in the future as we move forward out of this.
Cory, I met you through your dad, Tim, who was a timing and penalties guru for marching band and drum corps, and one of the greatest people I've ever met in my entire life. And I remember those days when I was judging and he was working on the field and all those competitions. And I was thinking, if competitions can't be held in stadiums with screaming parents and fans and dads hauling timpani and all that stuff to the sidelines, are we going to see the demise of competition for band or drum corps? And do you see the development of a virtual band competition circuit?
I want to say yes in terms of development of virtual band competition sort of thing, but the demise of competition overall in terms of in person, yeah, I think it really depends. It really depends on the science of the a vaccine, or in the case of the newer Ebola drug, I think it's called remdesivir, that works as a treatment. All of a sudden, it becomes a manageable thing versus this scary existential threat. So I think as that develops, we'll get a clearer picture of what it's going to look like in terms of competitions and things like that. That being said, I personally don't know what a virtual marching band competition would look like and how that would be structured and how those pieces would work together. I know there is a virtual drum corps that's starting up that's going to be, from what it sounds like, a virtual choir, like Eric Whitaker's virtual choir, but in drum corps setting. I still don't know what the product's going to look like, so I guess it really depends on what the creativity of the field produces. If it's something that people get a lot out of, then it might develop in parallel to or to replace. And if it's just kind of a one-off interesting thing, then it might go away and just be like you talked about earlier, a stopgap.
Yeah. Well, what I was thinking is like somebody's going to put together a pieware drill, and then they're gonna have their kids all play the music, and they're going to put the music to the pieware drill, and then they're going to have little videos of color guard kind of bordering the students playing
Hmm.
their instruments, and it's gonna get wild before it gets before maybe I've been drinking too much coffee. I'm not sure.
I'm on cup number 4 for the day, so I'm right with you.
So once we get back to face education, Cory, all the new instructional tools and strategies we've been forced to use, how's that's going to help influence our teaching? We talked a little bit about it earlier, but
Right.
let's
I
really
think it's going to.
look at it.
I think it's so. Like, Steve Jobs has a great quote where he talks about humans being like a middling efficiency creature on Earth, but when you put us on a bicycle, we're the most efficient. And he called computers bicycles for the mind. I think we're going to hopefully start to see that technology becomes that bicycle for the mind in band. We tend to get dinged in ensemble music in general, but band specifically, for using technology in a very superficial way. Like we use a tuner or a metronome sometimes, or we'll do smart music or something like that. I think we're going to start to see people really deepening the experience and integrating technology that they had to use during the pandemic into daily instruction in a way that it becomes seamlessly integrated into the student's experience. So they don't know that it's additional technology because the fact that we are incorporating it so cleanly, it dissolves into the background. I think that's what we'll start to see, and people will pull from things that worked during the pandemic, but also they're going to have a really clear case for why they don't want to do something because of its lack of efficacy during this time.
Wow, that's good. I like that. So, as you were working on your bachelor's degree in Chicago, you were already also marching with the Cavaliers Drum and Bugle Corps, and I know you enjoyed that experience a lot. And how did that experience help influence your philosophy as a teacher?
Interestingly, for being in a super competitive activity like drum corps, it actually really made me focus less on the outcomes and more on the process. That was one of the mantras that we were kind of fed during my time in the Cavaliers, which was late 90s, early 2000s. And then I was on staff thereafter. The process is the thing that is going to make you great, not focusing on the product you're trying to create. And so that heavily infused into my teaching philosophy, especially in a state again like Texas, where we are hyper competitive compared to other places, where we talk to the students all the time about, you have to put in the hours to be able to do whatever it is you want to do, whatever the goal is you have. But the quality of those hours is going to set up what you're able to demonstrate in a performance situation. We always talked about doing 100% of what they know how to do and making sure that they are building on past successes and using those as the baseline rather than a high point that becomes your new starting point. And so that I pulled a lot out of my experience at the Cavaliers because it was so infused with this, competitive winning ranking sort of thing that we were very kindly shielded from that by people like Jeff Fiedler and Bruno Zuccolo and Drew Shanefield, our caption head when I was there, as well as David Bertman, that we were focusing on how do we get better as performers and musicians, as individuals, and letting that process show up in our performance and the thing that's evaluated.
So, Cory, one of the things that's always impressed me about you is when you were a student at Vandercook, you not only were totally engaged in the curriculum and all the things that were required or asked of you there, but you had this whole other agenda going on the outside that few people knew about. And that agenda was like, I got to learn, I got to learn, I got to learn, I got to learn. And you put yourself in a position where you experienced so many more things than any other kid that would have gone to school and just paid his tuition and showed up for classes. So, with that in mind, last question. If you have a student and that asks you some advice on how best they could improve as a musician, what would you give them?
That's a great question. I think the best advice I can give is say no as little as you can, say yes as often as you can, and be okay with making mistakes as long as they're good mistakes. One of the things that even now at age 40, I still struggle with is this idea of failing forward or having constructive mistakes or constructive failures. And I recognize in my development, I had a lot of points along the way where I could have gone down the road of that being the thing that derailed me. And instead, I said, okay, what can I learn from this? How do I kind of make this into an experience that is not a lose, but is a learn? Because the thing that's really struck me in watching my undergraduates now is that if we set up a situation where their two options are they win or they learn rather than they win or they lose, all of a sudden all outcomes become much more positive for their mental well-being, but also they learn more. They get stronger as teachers. And so that would be my suggestion to anybody is put yourself out there, say yes as often as you can, and set yourself up in a way that either you win or you learn. And often if you learn, you also win. So win-win.
Dr. Cory Meals, it's great to talk to you. You look well. Give my best to your folks and your family, and I hope to see you soon.
Thank you so much, Dr. McGinney.
It's always great to see someone you had as a student along the way become successful. Cory Meals continues to display that focus and vision that impressed me during his years as an undergraduate. To see him doing great things as Dr. Cory Meals at the University of Houston does this old man's heart good. Keep up the good work, Cory. In a minute, we'll check in with Dr. Tim for some thoughts as we end today's podcast.
Band Talk with Charlie Mangini and Friends is made possible through the generous support of the Eastman Music Company. From the first student instrument to the professional heirloom, Eastman Music Company is committed to crafting the finest instruments for musicians throughout the world. For more information, visit eastmanwins.com.
So we're going to check in with our good friend, Dr. Tim Lautzenheiser, to kind of wrap up today's podcast. Dr. Tim, how you doing?
I'm doing fine, Charlie. How are you doing?
Man, I'm doing great. Tim, you've been home since when now?
March 18th. Yeah.
That's
Go ahead.
That's the longest you've been home since you were like in 6th grade, right?
You know what? You're exactly right. Even when I was teaching, we were doing runouts and everything. Well, you were part of it. You were in the car with me, and this is the longest I've ever been in one place at one time. Yeah.
So yeah, I bet you're really having a good time, huh?
Well, you know what? It's interesting because I think it's like everybody else. A day is a day. 24 hours is 24 hours. And if you're committed to what you're doing, it's just another day. It goes around. So, like you could be on an airplane or you could be home doing what you're doing, but you're always busy, right?
You're always busy. Got to keep it going.
Yeah.
You got to keep it going. Well, Tim, I want to talk a little bit about music advocacy, something that's really close to your heart and something that you have spent a great part of your life advocating for advocacy and the importance of it and getting teachers to go. And I always remember you and I were together at the Illinois Music Educators Conference on a Thursday night, and we're walking down the hallway, and this band director screams like from 40 yards away, and he goes, "Hey, Dr. Tim, hey, I need some of that advocacy stuff because there's a school board meeting next week and they're talking about cutting my program." And you and I kind of looked at each other and we kind of laughed, and you were very kind to him. But that's kind of where we are right now with the different scenarios that are popping up for fall. Is it too late for teachers to start doing anything in terms of advocacy with their administration and communities?
No, it's never too late. It's never too late. I mean, some people like you have been wise and it's constant. It's like watering a plant. You want the plant to grow, you water it. You just don't wait till its leaves are about to go off and then pour a ton of water on it. No, I think it's really important now for our voices to make a difference. And, when people go, nobody listens to me. Well, that's because you aren't at the table talking. So, we have to get to parents. We have to get to administrators. We have to let the message be known. And just to stand back and go, well, let me see what comes down the pike. I think you're Destiny's plaything then. I think it's all the time. Okay, you know that. Nobody's better at it than you are.
Well, I understand that. And of course, when this first started, the smart teachers, not that the people that are listening that didn't do this aren't smart, but they already started thinking about advocacy. They were sending copies of their lesson plans and what they plan to do to their administrators. And so if you didn't do that, if you haven't kept your administrators in the loop, I guess one of the things you could do would maybe do a survey to your parents and do a survey to your students and ask some questions and collect some data and then share that with the administrators.
Yeah. I mean, you just have to get the stuff in front of their eyes, in front of their brains, out of sight, out of mind. Right, Charlie?
Exactly.
So, good advice you give there, my friend.
So as the states are getting less and less tax money, that means that tax money is going to impact the amount of money that school districts are going to get. I mean, we're in a chance really that, and boy, I hate to be doom and gloom, but we could see districts maybe thinking about cutting way back on music programs, music staffing, furloughing teachers and stuff like that. So advocacy is more important now than ever.
Yeah, it really, it's critical now. I mean, we're it's sort of, and you can't close the barn door after the horse is out. That doesn't make any sense. So yes, I mean, again, your idea of we have to get information in front of these people's eyes so they can see, because with less money, I mean, well, we all know this. With less money, it's going to go to reading, writing, and arithmetic, and that's where it should go. Those are the cornerstones. However, I mean, you and I and people listening to this go, well, music's part of that too. And that's where we have to keep reminding people and championing this and waving the flag that, oh, hang on, we're an academic pillar too. We have to be in there because it's easy to let it slide. And we all know your whole life has been advocacy. What we're all doing is advocacy, and it never quits. It never quits. So yeah.
How about involving school boards? Is that something that they probably shouldn't do, or should they just go to their administrator? What would you do?
I would be at the school board meetings. I would have parents there and stating the case, not shouting it, but just saying, look, here's the evidence, here's the information. There is so much correlation between a child's success and their involvement in the arts. You just can't deny it, because what happens is when they get in the arts, music, whatever it is, their academic scores go up. Their emotional state gets better. Music is a solid, it's part of who we are. And you can't have full growth and development with having the arts as part of your journey. It just is.
Yeah,
So
so I
yeah,
imagine. Yeah, so I imagine that a lot of school districts right now are probably doing virtual school board meetings, and of course, those meetings have to be open to the public as well. Correct?
I think so. I think you're right. Yeah,
Yeah, I think they have to be open. So maybe that's a good forum for teachers to find out when those things are going to be, and maybe even have a student that speaks to the school board and thanks them and let them know that during this time of distance learning, boy, music has been the thing that's really kept me going.
I think it's kept kids together better than anything, to be real honest, because I'm not sure, and this is not a disparaging remark to anything else, but I'm not sure the math kids are talking to each other. But we know the music kids are.
Yep.
That's their family, that's their culture. That's what they live for and live on. And so, yeah, that's a great idea. Have a student talk to the board. Man, there's nothing louder than the purity of a kid's voice.
Yep. And the younger, the better.
Oh, amen. Amen. Absolutely.
The younger, the better. So what do you think for fall? What do you think is going to happen? You think the schools are going to open? You think it's going to be like sporadic? Some states are, some states aren't. I mean, we've already seen several things happen. We've seen that the University of California state system, Fresno State, and those universities have already said no in-person classes for the fall. We've already seen Ohio music educators say there will be no all-state band at their state convention in 2021. So we're already starting to see things where people are making bold statements. On the other hand, we've got colleges and universities and high schools, and they're planning to have face-to-face. So, I mean, do you think education can exist with multiple systems in place?
Maybe it kind of already has in some fashion. I mean, no two are alike. I think what we know for sure is we don't know anything for sure. And we're all making plans and blueprints based on what we think is going to happen, which is great. I mean, contingency plans we have to have, but I think it will unfold as we see it. We're going to open our doors regardless. Well, that may not be true. And it may disappear and everybody's back in action and downshifting too.
Yeah. Covey always talked about having a paradigm shift. And I think probably teachers right now need to force a paradigm shift on themselves and create 10 different scenarios that could happen for fall. If this happens, then I'm going to do this. If that happens, I'm going to do that. I mean, right now, I think teachers need to be concerned with two things. Number one, when schools reopen, that those kids' butts are sitting in their seats. So whatever they're doing online and with parents and with the faculty and the colleagues, administration, they got to make sure that they're advocating for kids to come back and be a part of the program.
Yeah, the advocacy, as we all know, has to be student-centered. It has to be about the student. And that's because the most important thing to parents are their children. It has to be about the student because that's part of the whole learning possibilities. Mary was talking yesterday, Mary Lurson, who's great. She said, there's three things you have to be ready for. chamber music, and chamber music. That you may have to be ready for that, where kids are 5 of them in a room, and
Yeah.
so we don't know.
Yeah. That's gonna be pretty hard though, with programs that have 2 directors and 300 kids in it.
Yeah. Now here's another thing. Here's a positive spin to that. You could actually get more kids involved. You could actually get more people involved if there's some virtual part of this too, where we see it this way. And like, as you said, great paradigm shift. Wait a minute. We can have all this going on all over. So, music for every kid is always mine. So I think you're right. Spot on.
So last question this morning.
Yeah.
Recruiting kids into band for fall from a distance. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I'll throw one to you and you can ricochet it. Communication. Go.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's it, right? It's going to be teachers getting to parents and kids and talking about the program and sharing. And we've already seen some people that have done some great videos online to entice kids. And yeah, they've got to let them know that they're there. But yeah, that's going to be something that again, they're going to need to get together with their staffs, their administration. They're going to need to talk about it, get with their music dealer, involve their music dealer, because they are I think they're the real secret to the success of any sort of recruitment program, getting the instruments in kids' hands, making that contact with the parent. I mean, just kind of completing the circle.
Well, we were on a call yesterday with 200 dealers, and again, not to find the silver lining or be Pollyannish about this, but it's exciting to see the language change from, well, this is my territory and this is my territory, to what can we do collectively together to get the entire community, entire, meaning the whole educational system, to recognize and make sure music is in there. And to see those people lock arms like that, man, that's exciting. So
we got to, what did the old mayor from Chicago, Rahm Emanuel, say? Never let a good crisis go to waste, right? Yeah. Take advantage of it, find the things that we can use to our advantage, and run like hell, right?
Well, and Darwin was right. The strong shall survive.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it'll be.
Dr. Tim, thanks for sharing a few minutes with us this morning. We'll check in again.
Okay. Good to see you, Charlie. I love you, pal. Bye-bye.
Love you too, man. Yeah. Bye-bye. Always great to catch up with my dear friend, Dr. Tim. He's simply the best. Well, that's Band Talk with Charlie Mangini and friends. Next week, we'll have a conversation with composer Michael Sweeney and visit with Dr. John Clymer, Director of Bands at the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee. Thanks for listening, and have a great week.
Thanks for listening to Band Talk with Charlie Mangini and friends. If you would like to send a question to Charlie or have a comment, please send an email to bandtalkcharlie@gmail.com. We hope you will let your colleagues, students, and friends know about Band Talk with Charlie Mangini and friends. Thanks for joining us, and we look forward to being with you again soon.